We are so glad that you joined us for today's episode. We just want to let you know that this is a pretty frank conversation. So if you have little ones running about or in the room, you may want to save this episode to listen to later or pop in your earbuds because there's quite a bit of sensitive information in this particular podcast. Thank you again so much for joining us for this very important conversation. Welcome to the Music for the Soul podcast, where we talk honestly about difficult things. This is a place where music, hope, and healing come together. I'm Becky Nordquist.
And I'm Steve Seiler. Glad to have you with us today for a conversation with one of the smartest, most courageous, most passionate people I have ever known. Let me introduce to you Lisa Thompson. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Becky.
We are so glad to have you on the show today. We will be talking about some difficult things, as we usually do, but important things to bring awareness to and offer some hope and healing, hopefully, as well. So we're just going to jump right in. Lisa, could you just tell our listeners a little bit about the National Center on Sexual Exploitation and what it does?
Yes. Thank you both so much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure. And in terms of your question, Becky, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, we work to create a world where people can live and love free from sexual abuse and exploitation. So in a nutshell, that means that we're working to combat a lot of different forms of sexual abuse and exploitation and helping people to see the interconnections between them. It's been our approach to highlight the threads, the ways that various forms of sexual abuse and exploitation overlap and feed and fuel one another. That's something that in our experience seemed to be lacking in the movement. You might have, really wonderful work going on in one sector, say on child sexual abuse happening over here, but then somebody's not recognizing how the issue of consumption of pornography might be fueling and feeding that problem. So a lot of what we're doing is to try to connect the dots between various phenomena and show how things are actually interrelated. But the ultimate goal is that we really do want to create a world where people are free to live and love absent of exploitation, sexual abuse in their lives. And wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Think about all the harm and trauma that would fall away and the human flourishing that would result if we were all to be dedicated or really put some energy in that direction.
May it be so.
No doubt. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but this is a very dear topic to my own heart, being a survivor and what I like to say now, a thriver of that type of history. It is amazing to me, as we've talked with different people, how they don't correlate with a lot of abuse being tied to pornography. I know we've talked about my husband's battle years ago with it and just how that was one lie he believed was that it wasn't hurting anyone. He, first of all, didn't recognize how it was hurting himself, but then how it really contributes to this exploitation and the abuse of others. And the other thing I was amazed to learn is that often our trespassers have been victims themselves. So it just perpetuates. And I just am so grateful that you guys are educating and bringing awareness to these things. And so often, victims are, you're strapped with a lifelong sentence in so many ways. Those shackles you're just enslaved to and have to overcome. And it's a really tough place. So what exactly, Lisa, is your role there?
Well, I've learned over the years, I've been with the organization almost 8 years now. I've had the opportunity to wear several different hats, but currently I'm within the Research Institute, and it's really my favorite spot so far. I get to spend time reading studies and trying to just build the evidence, show people that there's, social science, medical science, that demonstrates harms that result from various forms of sexual abuse and exploitation. And in a weird way, that's satisfying to be able to pull together the evidence that will help equip the whole organization to better articulate and show people the evidence of harm so that we can persuade people to change the way they think about these issues. Unfortunately, we live in a time where there's been so much normalization due to the massive exposure to pornography. And we really live in this pornified world now where most people see the world through a pornified lens, where there's a lot of sexual objectification, where sex is very, I would say, devalued. Even though it's being front and center, it's actually devalued. It's not deemed as something intimate, something to treasure, something that builds connection between people. It's really just like junk food now. It's a consumable, and it's something you just kind of imbibe all the time, and it's really lost any deeper meaning. So we hope that we can create a culture where people can see that we've lost way more than people imagine that they've ever gained by treating sexuality this way. So we do a lot of different work. We have different buckets. One of those big buckets revolves around our law center. The law center focuses on bringing litigation against really large corporations that fuel these problems, but due to their irresponsible policies and practices. So a lot of that involves social media companies. A lot of that is targeted at some of the biggest pornography distributors in the world. You know, we're coming alongside, working together with other law firms and individuals who've been harmed on those websites to try to hold them accountable, to bring justice to survivors of individuals who've been exploited on those platforms. So there's a lot of work, very heavy work going on in the area of civil litigation. Another big area that we focus on is public policy, working to change laws to create more access to justice and, of course, to create regulation so that we can prevent harm before it even happens. So both at the federal and the state level, we're very actively working, particularly around issues that involve online sexual exploitation of children, or a kind of an issue that's emerged the last few years, image-based sexual abuse, which involves the non-consensual distribution of sexual images. Another big bucket that we work on is around corporate policy. So trying to elevate and expose to corporations themselves how they are responsible and culpable for creating harm, because they have not baked in or developed by design protections that are safe, particularly for children. So our goal is to help them through advocacy, through exposing, by showing through evidence the ways in which their platforms, particularly social media platforms, have been used and are still being used to fuel sexual abuse and exploitation. We go to those corporations, we provide them detailed evidence about what's going on. And then we also create campaigns that allow the public to weigh into, to create social pressure on those entities so that they are motivated to do something. And I have to say, it's been wildly successful, beyond our imagination of what we've been able to do these last few years. We have a project that's really probably what people would consider our flagship program. It's called the Dirty Dozen List. And it's where we name corporations, entities that are responsible for fueling sexual abuse and exploitation. Sometimes they're literally profiting from it. And by highlighting this and providing all the evidence, it's shining a spotlight on what's going on. It's creating. They're not able to hide behind some excuses. It's all out there, public for people to see. And we write detailed letters to them explaining exactly what's going on. We create actions that the public can take to try to create that social pressure. And then many times we end up in dialogue with these companies and then change results. We get results from these campaigns. So if anybody wants to check it out, they can go to our website in sexualexploitation.org/Dirty Dozen List 2023. Just go to our main page and you can see there's a banner for the Dirty Dozen List right there.
Lisa, you're reminding me of a conversation I had with the representative of a very well-known hotel chain that projected an image of family friendliness. We're a hotel that loves families, and we support families and provide things for families. And at that hotel chain, in their in-room service, they had pornography. And when I challenged them on the inconsistency of that, I was on the phone with the guy for about an hour, and I was amazed that he gave me that much time. And I asked him if he was a father, and he admitted that he was. And by the end of the conversation, he's like, "Yeah, you're right. We shouldn't do that, but it's above my pay grade." Basically admitting that this was a financial decision, and they're making money off of what's going on that subscription channel in their hotel room. So the only way they're going to ever change that is if something like the Dirty Dozen list exposes and embarrasses them, literally. And what I hear you saying is that you guys are making the case, not just to the general public, but to these corporations, that the normalization of sexual exploitation has occurred. And of course, you tend to think of people at a certain age, but I'm thinking right now, like if an executive is in their 30s, they've grown up in that normalized society. So they don't even remember what it was like, 50, 60 years ago.
Right, right. Well, first, back to your point about the hotels. It's interesting that you bring up that example because in the area of hotels is where we first had some of our major successes by working with corporations, highlighting this problem, and eventually getting some of them to agree to stop provision of pay-per-view pornography in their rooms. And, some people were poo-pooing that and acting like that wasn't a big deal because people could still get pornography on their devices. But it really does make a difference because there were instances where we heard about families who would go to a hotel, go to a hotel. Maybe the parents are off getting food or distracted doing something else. The kids turn on the TV and somebody else's pay-per-view that they'd already paid for pops up on the screen, right? So now the
Right.
kids have been exposed to hardcore material. Or how often do we know that you have individuals, particularly men, who are traveling, they're away from home, they're lonely, they're stressed, the whole things that make people vulnerable to that temptation. And then it's just right there, like
Right.
a nice, convenient button that you can, a couple clicks and whammo, you're looking at pornography. So it was really wonderful that we were able to work with several hotel chains like Hilton and Hyatt, and they agreed after our campaigns to remove pay-per-view pornography from their rooms. And in the end, I think we helped clean up more than 2 million hotel rooms around the world.
Wow,
Wow.
that is so great.
Now we're kind of moving on to entities like Google. We had a really fierce battle on Chromebooks because they were giving out hundreds of thousands of Chromebooks and they didn't have the filters turned on. They're giving them out to kids without the defaulting to safety before these devices are given. And of course, we know what that means. It's not like the schools are going to be capable of getting all that done, or the parents are all going to get that done. So we're leaving children completely exposed to the worst of the internet without any protection. It's just crazy. Like, you don't give a 12-year-old keys to the car. Why are we handing them over devices that will literally open up the entire panorama of crazy stuff that's on the internet, not just the horrible extreme sexual stuff that's available in pornography, but it's just nuts. That's what was happening. But we worked with Google and they have defaulted to safety on Chromebooks.
On behalf of parents and grandparents everywhere, I want to thank you guys for what you're doing and what you, Lisa, personally are doing.
I have to thank you too, because we actually have a young boy who's 8, which I don't know if that statistic is relevant anymore, but it used to be the average age that a boy will often be exposed to pornography. I know my husband was 8 years old and it was on the playground. And he said to me, if I had access the way kids have access now, he said, I probably would have been far worse off than what I ended up being when I realized finally 10, 15 years later that I actually had an addiction that I couldn't stop. He said, I can't imagine having it right in my pocket all of the time in the shape of a phone or like a Chromebook. And we were a little concerned at first because we've been homeschooling and then we went over to a charter school and they were giving out the Chromebooks. But thankfully we have a great school and they actually put extra protection for our kids on there. And so often when you're a parent of kids that like to game and things like that, there's that pushback. Like, well, why can't I have access to this or that? Or why can't I chat with people I don't know? And we've had a lot of hard conversations with our kids and educating them. And that's so important on the home front, because to think that your child won't be affected is really quite foolish. And once they see something, we always talk about you can't unsee what you've seen. You can turn it off, but you've already seen it. So my job as a parent is to make sure, and I'm so grateful for your organization for working with us as parents to protect our kids, to say no access is going to be best for them in the long run.
You mentioned gaming, and I think this is a good opportunity to point out to people that it's not just a matter of what children might see on gaming platforms, but that they are really now hotbeds of places where people are trying to connect with children and groom them for
Mhm.
various forms of sexual abuse. And we actually have Discord on our Dirty Dozen list, as well as Roblox. And I encourage everybody to go online and check that out. So you can go to endsexualexploitation.org, click the banner graphic for the Dirty Dozen, and you can get in there and read all the details about what's going on Discord and also on Roblox. I think this is really critical because it seems like there's still a lack of awareness out there about the predatory things that are happening on these platforms. And I think sometimes parents just assume, well, they're right there in the living room. I can see them. What's going to happen? But we actually had an extremely heartbreaking story just come in recently about a grandmother who talked about all the things that happened to her 9-year-old grandson right there because of a gaming platform. And they thought he was safe, but it's not. We just can't make those assumptions anymore. We have to be so diligent. And even when parents are really on top of it, these platforms are so dangerous that things can happen to even the most diligent families. There was another article recently out of Utah where a family had done everything they're supposed to do to try to protect their child from online predators. But unfortunately, he connected with someone on a gaming platform. The child ended up being kidnapped. I mean, obviously, that's an extreme example, but it's nevertheless a chilling example that should serve as a caution for everybody about just assuming that, oh, well, I'm on top of it. It's not going to happen to my child. I just don't think we can have that kind of naive attitude anymore. Parents, grandparents, we all have to be so diligent about what they're seeing, what they're doing, and really sometimes make some hard calls that might restrict their access to these things, which is really hard in a culture where that just gives kids carte blanche to tons of stuff.
Yeah, and it's so their way of communicating in play dates now too. We used to talk on the phone for 2 hours with our friends, but now they want to meet online and play. And how safe are private chats? Because like when you talk about Roblox, that's a big one at our house. We've gone back and forth. For a while we banned it completely. Then we said you can have, your own private with just the friends that you personally know face to face, because they have a hard time differentiating between online friend and, a friend of a friend, but you don't know what the other house's protections are, or how do they know this person? Do they go to school with them? So we made sure that they were only friends with friends that they know face to face. But is that really even safe?
Becky, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. Roblox isn't my area of specialization, so I don't know that kind of level of detail. I do think it's obviously safer that they're not interacting with strangers. That's definitely hugely important, and something that we advocate for all the time is that strangers not be able to direct message children in these platforms, that there be some barrier to that, which a lot of them have not had for years. Police strangers are able to either direct message or even comment on posts that children make and so forth. So it's definitely a step in the right direction to be limiting their interactions with those they know. But it's still a place where a lot of exchanges could happen that you're not sure what's going on.
It's always that fine line, and you don't want to be the bad parent that your kid just hates you, like, okay, how can we get around this so you can still play with your friends? So how did you first discover Music for the Soul?
Well, that's a fun story. I received an email, I think it was, that was announcing that there was this video documentary available dealing with the harms of pornography called Somebody's Daughter. And I was like, wow, that's so amazing. It's something that we really need, because at the time I was working on the issue of sex trafficking, really focused on that issue and trying to work to combat it. But as the more I worked on that issue, there was a lot of effort going into provision of services to survivors and creating networks and identifying those who, were caught up in this form of exploitation. But the longer I was involved in those kinds of efforts, I was like, man, what are we doing to stop it? What are we doing to help cut off the stream that is, supplying creating these victims? And it made me think more and more about the buyers, about the demand for people to be available in the sex trade. And I thought, what's fueling that? Why is it that men think that they're entitled to be able to buy people for sex? And well, then naturally you start thinking about, pornography. Pornography is sort of the training manual for that. It's teaching its consumers to sexually objectify other people. It's creating a sense of sexual entitlement, what my friend Dr. Marianne Layden calls sexual narcissism, really. Because it's all about yourself, your own sexual pleasure. There's no mutuality involved in this. It's completely this selfish, self-absorbed exercise that involves using other people. And for some number of people who get involved in using pornography, it's not going to stop there. It's going to escalate. So what happens when people consume pornography is that over time, what you're looking at gets stale. It gets boring. And part of what creates the sexual excitement is finding something new, something that's different, something that breaks more cultural mores, what society might call, quote, disgusting, that is verboten in society. So like children, for instance. So over time, you start off with something that people might consider vanilla, not violent. It's your straight up hardcore pornography, but that gets boring. So the user starts exploring, and it's not hard to do now because there's literally any kind of scenario, any kind of bizarre thing imaginable. It's probably already been done. So you get all these ways of pursuing, going deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. Now, and so for some of those people, pornography itself will become boring, and they'll want to act out what they've seen on pornography on a real person. And so that leads some men to engage, go participate in purchasing a person in the flesh. So I think one thing that's important to think of is that I think one thing we misconstrue or we misconceptualize pornography as something separate from prostitution, when really it's a form of prostitution that's at one remove. It's people who are being commodified for their sex, even though there's tons of free pornography. There's a commercial aspect to all of this going on. So it's highly commodified through advertisements and click-throughs. Like the people who are making this available are profiting immensely. And of course, eventually a lot of people end up subscribing to various fetish sites or premium channels that these pornography companies make available. So it's immensely profit-driven in terms of the distributors of this content. So we should never divorce the idea of pornography from profit. Now, what's happened is a lot of the sex trade is completely moves online. It's a form of prostitution. It's just that the physical interaction is remote. We just see a big connection between various forms of sexual abuse and exploitation and the demand. And we see pornography as the training manual, the education that spurs people on to be lifelong consumers, whether it's online or whether it's in participating in in-person sexual exploitation of people in the sex trade.
So it's initially, especially in the case of Somebody's Daughter, where it's trying to humanize a person that's been objectified. And it sounds like the pornography really is almost like a gateway drug, if you will, into actually opening it up, like upping the ante. It's kind of like that drug wasn't enough. Now you need something even more dark in order to satisfy whatever it is you're trying to fill.
I would definitely say that's accurate. I definitely think once you begin, it's a rabbit hole. It's something that you can never reach the bottom of, and that's by design. That's how the pornography industry has set itself up for this endless quest for the next image, the next perfect thing that will satisfy you. Your consumption of pornography leads you to sort of this complete pixelated form of sexuality in which you're never with a person, you are only with a person on screen. So there are generations, some huge segment of young people who are called pornography virgins because they're having lots of sex through, masturbating online, but they're not actually ever present with another person in the same room. They've never actually had, intimate sexual relations with a person present. So, and I just think that's so despairing
Yes.
and so sad that this is what human sexuality has been reduced to.
And I think it's important to note there may be some who are listening that think, well, surely being a Christian protects you from this. And as you were talking, Lisa, I was reminded of a story that was very sad for me to hear personally. I'm not going to name the song, but I had a song that was very successful. It was a #1 song. And I learned from an engineer who was present when the song was being mixed during the recording process that they had a video with pornography playing while they were mixing my Christian song. So, lest anybody out there thinks, well, if I'm a Christian, I'm insulated, this isn't in the church or what have you, or it never happens to Christians. This is an equal opportunity destroyer. And the fact that you're a person of faith does not protect you from any of this unless you're proactive.
Steve, we've talked sometimes about the statistics within the local church. Can you share those for a second? Just because I think people don't think about the fact that they're sitting down the row from somebody who is trapped in an addiction. And it's just like, Lisa, you hit it. It takes you down this rabbit hole. It's a slippery slope. And before you know it, you've lost control of the wheel. And my husband equates it to, I put both feet on the brake because he scared himself because it wasn't good enough anymore. He put both feet on the brake and there were no brakes. He was pumping. He's like, I had no idea I had slipped into a hole so deep. So I just wanted to see if Steve, if you could speak to that statistic for a second.
Well, while I was out talking with people about somebody's daughter, and whenever I was doing radio interviews, always the first question was, can you give us statistics? And where I landed finally was, what are the odds that a child beginning school today will graduate from high school without having ever seen hardcore pornography? And most people would agree the answer is there's no chance at all. All right, at that point, what statistic do you need? Inside the church, outside the church, what statistic do you need? It's like there's a swimming pool and there's poison being poured in one end and we're letting our kids play in that pool. Well, it's not like you can separate that out. Once it's in the culture, it's in the culture. So that's what makes an organization like the National Center on Sexual Exploitation so valuable and important, because you guys are ringing the alarm. It's a 5-alarm fire. Like everybody needs to get a bucket.
And when the dad's sitting in the church and 50% would you say in the church are wrestling, of course, it's going to trickle down into the families and it's going to affect them as well. So it is a very prevalent situation in the church too.
Becky, you said something that I think is really powerful about what your husband's personal example, where you said, the brakes weren't working. And that's actually physiological, because this overconsumption of pornography, you're damaging the reward system in the brain by this repeated, constant dopamine overrush, which then results in a lessening of control, the frontal portion of the brain, where you have this executive control function. And it's actually been equated to the braking system of the brain. So it really stood out to me when your husband used that analogy, because, professionals in this field call it the braking center of the brain. And that's what's being damaged. And so it's no wonder the brakes no longer work, because he was experiencing that hypofrontality where it's just that part of the brain has been overworked and can't function properly anymore.
Yes, I love him so much because he's like, yes, you have, permission to talk about it and share my story if it'll help someone else because it's been a long recovery. And as we know, addictions, recovery, you're just always recovering and healing. And the Lord's been so good to him over the years. And we are so grateful for that. But I don't think, the one thing that he has said often to me is that I didn't realize he really, really believed that it wasn't hurting anybody else. He really didn't think it was damaging him. But as you step away from any addiction, you come to see the damage that it did was far greater. The price that you pay was far greater than any momentary pleasure. Because, I know as he shares his story, we should probably have him on the show, but as he shares his story, it was about relief from so much pain that he was in. And often we don't dig deep enough to see what was the root of stepping into that in the first place. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
I recently spoke to a group of high school seniors at a Christian high school because we're working on a project on anxiety, and I wanted to ask them what caused them anxiety. And Lisa, during the course of that conversation, I asked them if any of them used pornography as a release, and the answer uniformly in the room, there were about a dozen, maybe 14 young men there. They were all like, "Oh yeah," as if it wasn't even a question or wasn't even a thing. And this is in a Christian high school.
And
So
that's scary because the evidence shows that actually, that pornography, people might use pornography seeking palliative relief, seeking to relieve anxiety, but it actually fuels anxiety.
mhm.
So the more pornography you use, it actually increases your risk for having anxiety. So the very thing you're using to try to abate those feelings is actually, adding to them.
And here's the good news. They knew that. Even as they were confessing that, yeah, that happens. We know it's not good. We know it's not right. We know we don't need to be doing this. So that gave me some hope. Obviously opened a door for me to talk a little bit about what you've shared today. But I just love their honesty that they were able to talk about it and be forthright about it. Because unless we talk about these things, nothing changes.
Well, anyway, somebody's daughter, I thought at the time, all those years ago, was so speaking to a massive need that's still underdealt with, underrecognized within the church. It's amazing that that can still be the case. Anyway, I was just so impressed with somebody's daughter, with the music, which was so powerful, with the documentary and the study guide. We just wanted to help people get it and start trying to, what I thought, and still believe, is dealing with some of the root issues that lead to sexual abuse and exploitation.
Well, Lisa, one of these times we want to have you back and pick up the conversation right here because this is such heavy material, and I don't want to
Mhm.
overwhelm our listeners. So I'd like to discuss this some more with you again in the future, if that's okay.
Of course.
I just want to let people know there are therapists who use somebody's daughter to this day. I've been told it's still the best thing out there, which is incredible to me because of how long ago it was. But I think the power of the piece was the honesty of the people who were sharing their testimony. And I think always when it's the truth that will set us free.
This is I think, the core struggle of our time
Mm.
is dealing with our sexuality, trying to live lives with sexual integrity,
Yes.
to not be caught up in this sexual consumerism. This is the thing that is wrecking people's faith, their opportunity to thrive in the world, to have deeper, more meaningful relationships, and keep their marriages intact, and of course to be how they live their lives as people of faith. This is really breaking that down for a lot of people, stopping that. So, I mean, I'm saying that as on my personal behalf, as a follower of Christ myself.
Mm.
Well, thank you for your courage and your passion. You make such a difference in the world, and you are such a dear friend. And I thank you for joining us to talk about this today.
Thank you
Yes.
so much for having me. Yeah,
Thank you
I
so much. And speaking to that place where, it does so much more damage mentally and spiritually, but and relationally, but also physically too, and adding some knowledge to our listening audience today regarding the sciences a little bit behind some of that and the areas of the brain that are triggered and can be ultimately damaged from the pornography addiction and how it feeds into other areas.
I just would like to close by saying what a powerful difference I think Music for the Soul has made in this area. I think as Steve as well knows that music has this capacity for healing that just words alone can't touch our heart in the same way. I'm just thrilled to know about Steve, to know about his work, that he's using his talents in this way. Because we really have to, there's so many ways to come at these issues, like we're doing it, and litigation and policy and corporate advocacy. Steve's bringing it right down to the individual level, to the individual healing piece. And I love that. We have to have all of these pieces. This is how we're going to eat the whole elephant.
Thank you, Lisa.
So great. Could you just remind our listeners one more time where they can get this information that we shared today?
Sure. Our website is endsexualexploitation.org. And again, we're the National Center on Sexual Exploitation.
Well, we are so grateful. And on behalf of survivors everywhere, I just want to say again, thank you. Not all of us do get to see our day in court or get justice for the many trespasses, but we are grateful for the fight that you all have done on our behalf. So thank you so much, because laws are changing, and I'm just grateful personally too. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please share it with a friend and give us a positive review on iTunes.
And please visit our website, musicforthesoul.org, where you can stream or download every song in our catalog, including Somebody's Daughter, and read our lyrics, our healing music guide, our blog posts, and much more. Thank you for listening. God bless.
Moment she was born, her mommy and daddy cried, taken by the wonder of her life. From Barbie dolls to ballet shoes, from roller skates to lipstick and rouge, she's become a lady overnight. Why do I see only flesh and look right past her heart? I try to tell myself I can't help what I feel. Then I remember she's somebody's daughter, somebody's child, somebody's pride and joy. Somebody loves her for who she is inside. She has a mother and father. She's somebody's daughter. You made her together, your cherished creation. Made her body a temple for the soul. Why can't I appreciate the beauty that your hands have made and maintain my self-control? Because when I see only flesh, you're looking at her heart. There is so much more to her than meets the eye. I need to remember she's somebody's daughter, somebody's child, somebody's pride and joy. Somebody loves her for who she is inside. She has a mother and father. She's somebody's daughter. She's somebody's daughter.